Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Static Feedback, brought to you by CloudCannon. Today we're joined by George Phillips, the co-founder and CTO. George, welcome. Thank you for coming along.
Cool. Thanks for having me.
I'm wondering what is on the cards for 2023. I want to talk about what happened last year. It was a big year for CloudCannon in 2022. And I'm also looking forward to hearing more about our product roadmap for the year, for all of the developers and editors who are looking at using CloudCannon. So can we start by recapping 2022? What were the high points for you over that period?
Yeah, 2022 was a big year for us. We made, on average, one release per week. One of the big changes we made was the global configuration file. Prior to now, we didn't support that many static site generators, and all of our configuration went in with that static site generators configuration. You imagine Jekyll having their config.yaml, and then suddenly there's all these CloudCannon keys in there. Even just the discoverability of what that means, like what keys are for Jekyll and what are for CloudCannon. So that's all been moved out into a CloudCannon config.json YAML, or even a JavaScript file to configure all that. And that was the thing that really opened the door to taking almost every static site generator out of, putting all of them into beta. Because now we have this file that's independent from the static site generator, and we can run that code over pretty much any CLI command. So then we can support JavaScript SSGs, Go SSGs, doesn't matter. We're just reading the same file and outputting the same file to configure our front end. We added lots of syncing changes. So we added support for Git LFS, and we rewrote our entire syncing framework so you can change branches on particular sites. It's much more resilient to pushes failing or pulls failing. It'll keep your changes, like let's say GitHub goes down for 2 hours, which happened maybe 2 or 3 times last year. I think 2 out of the 3 we hadn't released our updated syncer, and the third one, it was much more resilient. It just when downtime was finished, it just pushed the changes back and it was all good. It just figured it out, which is amazing. That's probably been 9 years of syncing changes which haven't operated that way. So it's just amazing to be able to say our syncer is so reliable now. And that just opens the door to a lot more things happening on that Git side. It's such a core function of a Git CMS that it can push and pull. So yeah, pretty happy to have that done and tidied up. We also added support for dams and assets, which allows people to not store large files in their Git repo, which was one of the other big things of fixing up the syncing. If you've got a 1 gigabyte video, you don't really want that getting built every time you're going through your SSG build. You don't really want that being cloned down to everyone's developer repo. That kind of belongs to live in something like CloudCannon or S3. And then we added, tidied up a lot of our configuration once we got it in the global config. So we've got schemas now, which can help keep your data up to date. So that's, yeah, pretty amazing stuff. That you can add a key to a schema, and then when you open that editor the next time, that extra key is sitting there. Imagine you've got 2,000 files in that collection. That's a lot of time saved. So we did a lot of things around that configuration just to make sure that once you do have it configured, it's a nice experience. We redid our entire editing experience. So this was a big one. Previously, if you wanted the live preview of your visual changes, you would have to make the changes, then hit save, then wait for your build before making another save. We took the wait for build out of the entire experience. So now if it's waiting for the build, it'll just show a banner to say some of your changes are pending, preview. And with that change, we also added the live previews. And so if you are working with something that has a live rendering function, like something in React or something in our component system like Bookshop, you can have the editors make a change, and then that change shows up live to see. That's like definitely the direction we're trying to take the whole company, is just how can we make sure that there's no mental work having to happen between I enter in this text box and therefore it changes this thing. We want to get it as close to I'm changing this thing. So that also allowed us to edit and save multiple files per save. So now you can make a multi-file commit. You can upload a bunch of files, which will just reduce the number of commits that are happening in general. You might want to discard some of those changes. So there was a lot of workflows around managing what files go through that commit process. And a lot of that will help with future releases that we want to do around the editing workflow. A big change people wanted again on the syncing is we changed the GitHub app. So previously you had to authorize your entire OAuth on GitHub, which gave access to every repo that you had on GitHub. That is obviously not ideal. So we upgraded our GitHub integration to a GitHub app, and now you can configure per organization which repos you want us to have access to. And we could also majorly reduce the number of permissions because that comes by default with a webhook from each one of those repositories. So we only really need push access to your repos the only ones that you actually want us to have access to. We did a bit of an audit on Bitbucket and GitLab and also reduced those permissions, but they don't have a similar function. So when that happens, we can look at integrating. We also added snippets, which was massive. Historically, we've been very good at editing front matter and data, things we can parse in, change the content and stringify back into a file and create a commit on. Snippets is our way of creating editability within long forms of text, specifically Markdown. So you imagine a Hugo shortcode or a JSX file or some custom piece of code that your static site generator understands within a free-flowing piece of text, which has variables and all these other things. We want to edit that in the exact same way we can edit those strongly parsable and stringifiable files like JSON files. So we found a way of creating our own custom parser that can read through your code, find these blocks of code that have variables attached to them. And now you can configure those blocks with the same inputs you can configure everything else with. So that has been massive, and that's going to be a big part of supporting static site generators in the future. Because you think about Next.js support or Gatsby or Docusaurus or Astro, any of those ones which have Markdown with JSX within it, an MDX file, that is a piece of code sitting in between a bunch of other Markdown. And we don't know what formats will come up in the future, so we've kind of just left the door open to supporting anything that's within a small block of text. And for the editor, they get to click on a fully customizable preview of a box and edit a bunch of form fields that you can configure yourself. Like, that feature was enormous. And in the last month of 2022, we doubled the number of SSGs that were out of beta. So we added 11T and SvelteKit out of beta with a fully page building experience with documentation. So that's super exciting, and that'll be a major part of 2023. We're a CI/CD platform as well as a CMS, so anything that runs on the command line and can output into a set of static files can technically be used on CloudCannon. And if the files are of a particular format on the source, they can be edited. So that enables any static site generator.
And that's something not a lot of people probably are aware of, that we support really any static site generator technically, and it's just the documentation and the themes or the template around it that makes it really sing for people.
Yeah, it's a really interesting challenge for us because we want to add support for a lot of static site generators, which includes expanding our personal knowledge about how they work. And we want to make sure that our level of support can stay up to scratch. And so that customers coming to us wanting to achieve certain things on certain static site generators, we essentially need to upskill within those static site generators to support them and know about any kind of build errors that might happen, any kind of gotchas that might come through the process, anything we need to have installed within our CI/CD environment. It's a really fun environment for us to play with all these new technologies coming out, and also some older ones that a lot of people still use.
Yeah, I really like that sense of play with technologies, and that's what I get a sense of as well around the CloudCannon office. Is it's an enjoyable process to learn these new tricks and new tools.
Exactly. Yeah, when you get to pick up a ticket that says learn Next.js or learn Astro, and then build a template out of it, and then write some documentation for it, it's quite a daunting ticket, but it's actually quite fun because getting the opportunity to work and just learn on the job is really exciting.
I think that sort of approach too, it seems to be connected to the SSG creators, the maintainers of these projects as well, doesn't it? Because we're thinking about developers and we're thinking about editors, but then there's a lot of interplay with the people who are actually making these static site generators.
Agreed. Early on, we were a Jekyll content management system, and Jekyll gave us a lot of opportunities to hook into the internal systems and output a bunch of data. There are certain static site generators that, like Hugo or Eleventy, that are similar to that, where they have these strong opinions where we can make it almost magical. How our content management system works is that we create a plugin that can hook into their hook system, and that in turn outputs a config for our front end to be able to, straight after your first build, edit your data, be able to add items just like a developer would. Other static site generators like Next.js, Gatsby, they're sort of more of application frameworks, so they're not necessarily built to be a static site generator. So that requires a higher level of configuration. So anything we can do to work with the original static site generator creators to plug into different places, build stronger templates, make the whole experience of adding a content management system more magical, and we're definitely looking to do more of that in 2023 as we release more out of beta.
Fantastic, and there's no shortage of SSGs to work with either. I keep on researching the major players in the field, but then there's always new ones coming along. So that's quite exciting too.
As certain languages become more popular, we're starting to see lots of improvements coming out of like Rust and things like that. We've got a lot of Rust fans within the company who are looking forward to the pace that can bring to certain file processing, because the faster the development experiences on these static site generators, the faster you can try something, see your browser refresh and get the response. And for a long time in CloudCannon, the build time was kind of connected to how well CloudCannon felt. We did a lot of work last year of making the editor work well, regardless of your build time. But a fast build time is always the time that it takes for you to preview your changes on the actual live website. Everything's so much nicer. So it's cool to see so much coming out, tackling the different avenues that you can improve and streamline static site generation.
And now I want to talk briefly about the power users of CloudCannon here, people who have a lot of sites to run or some very, very complex sites. What plans do you have in mind for people who fit into that category, whether they're agencies or enterprise customers or people with big chunky sites?
Yeah, we certainly did a bit of work last year to streamline creation of new organizations, getting your sites connected. But we're still planning on doing a bit more there around more configuration on how you can add new sites, how you can use sites as templates, how we can extend on the project branching workflows. We added one configuration file last year that allows you to write your initial site settings. So connecting a site, you don't need to worry about filling out your build configuration. We can read that right from disk. And for agencies, that's fantastic because you can build these template sites and use them as the foundation and skeleton of all of your new projects or your new clients. So you can start streamlining these processes. You know, as soon as you hit CloudCannon, it's going to build. It doesn't even ask you how it's built, and you can start having the specific changes like brand, color, content, all of those things be just the things you focus on, which is what the customers see.
We're talking about templates as well. Like internally, we're discussing how people use templates and static start generators. But this sort of thing gives an agency the ability to make their own, but at least agencies, I guess, make that process a lot easier for new clients.
Yeah, we're trying to make sure that there's nothing we can do that the customers cannot. So we're trying to build a lot of the magical things that we're building into our templates, and our experiences just be things that can be configured for developers for their team of editors. Because if we are a cloud platform, we really have to bridge that gap between software people can run and software people can configure. So that's a really big part of our ethos, is just making sure that people are happy knowing they can change almost everything about the platform.
Yeah, and we often think of a template as a theme that has visual or some other fancy elements coming in, but it seems to me that our templates are more in the realm of demos of very specific config files, like how to configure for this scenario. And that's something anyone can come in and look at. They can look at the config and they can adapt that for their own use.
Exactly. In the engineering team, we treat our templates as our proof of concepts. Like, here's what you can achieve on CloudCannon. Here's the absolute power use case of having this page being built, or here's a documentation use case with these different files positioned in these different folders with this different type of navigation, because you can do pretty much anything you want within CloudCannon, which is a good and a bad thing. It definitely makes documentation tricky. You hit the paint pictures of these different use cases that you can achieve, but once you understand the fundamental principles behind it, that it's your data and we're kind of just sitting on top of it, you really get this freedom of building these sites locally, knowing CloudCannon's going to be there for your editors to use.
Yeah. Here's a question about a day-to-day work that you do or the engineering team is doing. How do you scope out a ticket when you want to allow absolute freedom and you want to allow all these things to happen in the future? How do you scope that out?
So we take a lot of feedback from support and interviewing customers. The thing that we normally have when we get a new piece of feedback is either it sits within something we've already kind of configured and it's a new option for that configuration, or it's something we haven't gotten around to making configurable yet. And so then we need to, for the first case, it's quite easy. We need to see how we can write. We kind of start by writing an imaginary configuration of how it might work, and seeing how that might be reflected in the design side, and then that can go through some specifications and testing, and then we might build that and release it. So those are kind of easier. If it's something that our current configuration does not support, we try and take a lot of concepts from the rest of our configuration. This is something we're trying to do more and more of, is we're trying to normalize learning one bit of our configuration teaches you a whole bunch of other parts of our configuration. So if it's a new piece, that normally goes into a refinement session that happens once a week. We sit around with design and a few of the engineers and the customer success team, and then we turn that into a bigger ticket to get scoped out and designed. And there we'll spend a lot longer writing the example configuration, because that'll probably mean something like a root level key that hasn't existed before, and we've got to think about the language that we use on those keys so that it's kind of you can interpret just from the configuration what that might be doing. We often put that through the lens of, that's what this one person wants. We don't want to force that decision onto all of the other developers. So we suddenly have to think of what should be turned off and on this decision, what other potential ways of viewing this data, or what other takes could someone have. And it kind of bubbles out into this more scoping and figuring out where this fits in. And often then that is picked up when that becomes an important issue where we have enough information to tackle that job, and also have a path forward that even if we don't get it right the first time, we have this option to add more configuration or more options on without creating complex versionings within those keys. Having the ability to just add a new type of config or a new item to an array with a key leaves us a lot of flexibility to go through in the future.
Yeah. And what sort of challenges do enterprise customers bring to the table?
Enterprise customers typically come with a lot of compliance requirements. So we're working towards getting SOC 2 compliance this year. We're about 90% of the way there, starting our Type 1 compliance audit early Q1. And they also come with a bunch of other features that they require, like multi-factor authentication. Single sign-on is a big feature for them, but not everyone has that set up. So having multi-factor authentication for the smaller use cases is really powerful. Adding more things around permissions and fine-grained permissions of, I want this person to be able to access this stuff, but not this stuff. A lot of those sorts of things will be coming through later this year. And just more flexibility on the organization structures for them.
From a business perspective, where's your focus split between enterprise and agency and freelance developer? Are you covering the spectrum?
The great thing about that split is that all of them require the core feature functionality. Is that if we make our editing better, or we make our editors or our navigation or anything surrounding the core product of, I need to build a site and I need to edit that site, everyone wins. So quite a lot of the time we're focusing on building out features that support for anyone and everyone. And then when it comes to the enterprise customers, we often build that as an as-needed basis. Again, with the config, we try and build things so that they're flexible and can add more onto. Dams are a big one of those. If people have particular requirements for dams, their assets are already stored in this bucket over in this unsupported file system. That can come through support, and we'll be able to negotiate how hard that is to build. And typically we like to enable those workflows, and those again are features that more people would probably need to come and use. So we're pretty happy to take those feature requests and fit them into our roadmap. For agencies, we're doing a lot of work for migrations, so getting people on the platform faster. The configuration at the moment is a point of friction, so making sure that that's really fast to come on from, for example, forestry. If there's a requirement for someone to migrate 50 to 100 sites, we often offer some assistance on the engineering front, so that even if we don't have the tooling right now that they could do it themselves, we're here with a helping hand to just get them across the line. And that's generally customers at any scale. If they reach out to support and have this big problem that's probably going to take a long time, we generally try to be quite supportive of them and turn it into something that helps the future of CloudCannon.
Yeah, that's something that struck me about seeing smaller support tickets given equal attention, that again, they're just treated like interesting problems. Hey, this is really weird. I wonder why. And you see people dig into it, and it's great to see. It's fascinating. Yeah,
and most of the time it's usually a developer hitting a problem working with a static site generator, and that kind of all scales. If an agency is migrating 100 sites versus a customer is hitting a problem trying to get one site across, probably the agency and that person with less sites, they're probably both hitting the same issues. So it's really nice to just look at them and look at the problems at differing scales.
So it's the rising tide theory of support, really, isn't it? That it's just everyone gets lifted slightly. So what does 2023 hold for CloudCannon?
2023 for CloudCannon is kind of two parts. The first half of CloudCannon is still focused on static site generator support. So we want to make sure that we can have support for Next.js, Gatsby, Astro, Nuxt, and as well as documentation use cases like Docusaurus, Sphinx, McDocs. So that's part one. Part two of the first half of the year is all about making sure that the configuration is more approachable. Kind of a double-edged sword of having a highly configurable content management system is that you've got to learn a lot of different configuration options. So we want to make sure that that's more approachable to anyone who's coming in. You don't have to sprawl through our docs to learn absolutely every value. We want to make sure that maybe we can offer some GUIs to configure the configuration. So that's really exciting to us, is that now that we have this good foundation of configuration and we have these static site generators that we essentially just need to document and create templates for, we really want to finish off that work to make sure that that's something we can just slowly iterate on and improve on with more user feedback and talking to the customers. The second half of 2023 is going to be a shift towards editors. So now that the developer use cases are working well, the CI/CD is working really efficiently, the configuration is more approachable. The next step is thinking about what the editors need and what the developers can do to configure for the editors. So there's things like live editing of data files. I'm imagining we have live rendering of page building at the moment, but imagine live rendering of a theme JSON file that feeds into your CSS, and you suddenly get this, like, you're changing a color slider and your whole theme is changing because it's changing the CSS variables on the fly. You've got a panel that pops out when you say edit this nav, and your mega menus and everything are getting edited live. There's no guesswork anymore, just the way we did with page building. You get this awesome experience across the entirety of the site. And so to me, it's kind of a question of completeness, is we've got this awesome experience for your front matter, and then you have to go to the data editor, and you still need to imagine the bridge between your content and where it goes on your website. You still need to save and refresh your live preview that we've given you. So if we can complete that, that's amazing. And then from there, we're thinking about, right, now that there's so much you can edit on the site and it's live, it's not so much about how can one editor write this content and make a commit. How can we make it so that this is more collaborative, so people can come in and comment and work together on the editing experience of that they really enjoy now, and create commits which are co-authored and pushed back to the repo that the developer can pull, and you get this whole experience from developer to non-developer to commenter to reviewer, where everyone's happy looking at the version of their website that they're happiest with. The developer can still use their VS Code, and hopefully we can get some more things on that side. Like, we're looking at releasing our API so the developer can do a lot of things locally, automate a bunch of things. CLIs that allow them to validate their configuration before pushing. And then maybe we can figure out a way that those comments can be in an environment where the developer is looking, and all that processing that is required across all of the site, the kind of portability that comes with these static site generators, plus the power of this editing system, which is again enabled by the content and static site generator being together. More image processing, more cropping, more like integrations with cool tools. Like, imagine having a dam which is connected to Canva or Unsplash, and you start getting all these external data sources which come together. And then once you've got this editing experience, you kind of get into the questions of, like, what should I be doing? And so maybe CloudCannon can help with the idea of what's the things you should be editing. So then you get into broken link checkers, SEO tools, you get into lighthouse scores, but not in a way that we know them, not in a way that says this file or this URL has this broken link, in a way that we can deep link from those actionable items right into the editor, right into the visual space that says, edit this because this link is broken, or change the SEO description on this because it's not specific enough, or lots of intuitive ways that we can make a job that is almost like web development is such an open thing that giving that assurance and validation that you're doing the job right.
It's really exciting coming in as a writer and editor to hear about the focus on editing, on looking at collaboration, but also just taking away the things that you do worry about. You worry about the SEO and you worry about broken links, and if those concerns can be addressed within the app, it's very exciting.
Yeah, you go to publish and you just feel good about it. You know you're writing, you know you've had someone check over your writing, and you know CloudCannon's there to support you, that all of the other stuff around you still hasn't broken. It's the same time everyone else in the software engineering world builds for themselves. But for some reason, websites have just kind of been left at the side. So we want to bring all the websites into Git. We want to bring all the editors into a world where they are comfortable, where everyone can do their job right. Do their job in a way that they're happy. Happy people make better decisions. Happy people produce better work. So if we can kind of drive happiness and people contributing to the web, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, well, that's a beautiful thing. And bringing editors in, and you mentioned using Git. I mean, Git to a lot of editors or a lot of writers is if not unknown, then it's a scary process. And focusing on removing the frightening aspects of it, I think is abstracting that process, at least, I think is a thing that CloudCannon has already done pretty well, and looks like that will continue. Yeah,
I mean, a lot of editors and writers are very comfortable using Google Drive or Dropbox, and essentially it's the same thing, but the commit happens for you. So it's definitely a solvable problem, and I think we've already done a lot of work in that. But there's kind of other workflows of, a production and staging environment. That's not something everyone is comfortable with, and it's also not a decision we can force people into certain workflows. Like, that decision is made by the team for the team, and so again, we need to build flexibility into it so that we can configure how things are done, but also we need to be able to configure documentation at the right points in time so that people know and what's happening, and there can be an informed decision without too much oversimplification or even too much complexity. People need to know, if I hit this button, this is going to go fire off something in my external pipeline, which is going to release the website to production, or this is not that bad because this is going to create a pull request, which then my peers can review. Both very similar actions of publishing, but both of them are very different to each other in terms of the repercussions of taking that lightly or not.
Great. Well, thank you, George. I'm curious though, what are a few things that you were most excited about for 2023?
I think the biggest thing is just hitting these exciting problems to solve. As CTO, that's kind of where my brain goes, is we've got a huge foundation of problems solved already. And so now we're getting into more and more specialized problem solving. The trade-off historically has been build an entire Git CMS and get it working. And now we get to focus on much smaller micro interactions that our customers experience on the platform. So we get to do a lot more research, a lot more talking to customers, being a lot more data-driven about what features are and aren't working, and building those improvements to those features, which we have to put in far less effort to get a much greater return on customer happiness. On top of that, we're building out the team. So we started a customer success function at the start of last year, and that'll allow us to create more documentation, allow more people to join the platform in a self-service way where people can kind of explore and find a way to play with the technology on their own, which is the way I like to explore technology. Anytime I'm looking at something new, I make sure that I can get in there, find the settings that I want, find the documentation, and kind of feel that sense of trust and comfort. So I think that's what's going to be really exciting. And then just seeing what people build on the platform, we're adding support for all these different static site generators. What cool stuff are people going to build and make available on the platform? And how much time are we going to save them by just letting them focus on building cool stuff? That's great. Thank you so much, George, for joining us. I'll look forward to all the exciting changes coming to the platform that I use every day. It'll be very cool. Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you very much.